Welcome to What Am I Signing? Today's document we are going over is the California Residential Purchase Agreement, aka the offer. So, when you're ready to buy a home, this is the document that you'll review with me or your agent that outlines all of the terms of the offer that you're submitting to the seller and hopefully the one that is winning. So, let's jump right in. Okay, so first off, we have a few disclosures and stuff that we'll go over as part of the packet. The first is the disclosure regarding real estate agency relationships. This document outlines what a seller's agent is, what a buyer's agent is, an agent that is representing both seller and buyer, which is considered dual agent or dual agency, which I'll talk a little bit more about as we get further down, and then what the sellers and buyers' responsibilities are, because in all real estate transactions, this is a two-way street. So there are responsibilities that you as the buyer have and we as the agent have to make sure we can get the deal done together. Next is the civil code and sections. This basically is just like a definitions page, outlines what an agent is, what a buyer is, listing agreement. So if you need a list of definitions of different words that are used throughout the document, this is where you can find that. Next, we get into what I like to call the meat and potatoes, AKA the grid. So this is where kind of all the information regarding your offer is going to fall. And we're going to go through each one step by step so you know exactly what you're looking at. First things first is you're going to have the date of the offer that it was prepared, the name of the buyer. So I use my grandfather's name in all these samples that I do. The address, 1234 Main Street in Sacramento, California, Sacramento County, and the zip code. And then you would also have the APN number, and we'll just put a placeholder there for now. And the APN number is kind of like the tax record number for the home to make sure you're getting that specific property rather than like a different property that have a similar address in the state of California. Next, you're going to have the seller's agent's information and then the buyer's agent's information. So I have a placeholder here, Grounded Real Estate, another agent in our office, and then Grounded Real Estate and myself representing the buyer. And then we move down to the actual grid. So first things first is the purchase price. What is the amount that we're offering for the home? If this is an all cash offer, we would check this button. If not, it would be a financed offer. Then we have our close of escrow period, which is typically I do 21 days. Your situation might be different. So once you see the actual form, it's going to have whatever we discuss. The expiration of offer is typically 3 days after you sign, unless we're in like a really tight situation or something like that. We can be a little bit lenient on the expiration, but that is kind of the standard. And I usually leave that there. The initial deposit amount is the amount of money that you will put in once we get our offer accepted. So we submit an offer. If we're the only one and they accept it, then you're in escrow. If there's multiple and then they accept ours, then we're in escrow. So at that point, you would have 3 business days to submit your deposit to escrow, which is the third party company that will hold the funds. It doesn't go directly to the seller. It goes to a third party company first that holds all the money for the transaction. And once it closes, it'll get dispersed. So typically in California, we do around 1% of the purchase price, which in this case would be $5,000. That number can be different. Let's say you're really serious about this home and you want the sellers to know that. You can increase that deposit amount. That's one way to strengthen your offer outside of offering a higher price. If for any reason you wanted to do an increased deposit, maybe at a certain milestone of the deal to show that you're really serious, that is something that we could do. So we would just check that box and add an amount of money there, or just put an example. And then moving down, we have our loan amount. So at $500,000, let's say you're putting 20% down. That means your loan amount would be $400,000, 80% of the purchase price, meaning you're putting $100,000 down. So down here, it'll do the calculation of how much is owed, and that's automatic. So you've already put 5,000 plus 1,000 is 6 out of 500,000. So you would only owe $94,000 when we get to the close of escrow. If you're doing any kind of jumbo loan or anything, we might have to do an additional finance amount, but that would be case specific. So I'll dig in deeper if that is your scenario when we meet. The standard loan type on the contract is conventional. And if it were any other, we would just check FHA if it was FHA. We would check VA if it was VA, or if it was seller financing, we would check that or some other form. So based on your contract, we'll check the appropriate box. The standard occupancy type is primary. If you're buying this as a secondary home or an investment home, then we would check the appropriate box for that as well. Moving further down, if there are any seller credits that we would like to request, this is the section that we would put it in. So, say, for example, there was something that needed to be repaired or replaced or bad roof or something, and we wanted to ask for a credit to cover that, then we would put that amount here. And that amount would be applied to your closing costs. So you're not necessarily getting the money up front, but it's money that is being put into the deal by the seller on your behalf. So it's less money that you have to bring to the table. So the idea behind it is less money you bring to the table, the more money you keep in your pocket. So you have that $5,000 to take care of whatever repairs those are. If there are any additional finance terms, we would include that here. And this is case specific. So if that's the case, I'll be sure to have that conversation with you when we get there. Here is where we would check the form to add the SPBB, the seller's payment to buyer's broker. If we're asking the seller to cover any portion or all of my commission, this is the box that we would check to fill out the appropriate form that allows us to request that. Next is the verification of all cash funds, verification of down payment, or a verification of loan application. So we would check the appropriate box for this. Basically, it says that the verification of all cash or proof of funds is attached with the offer or your proof of down payment. And then we would include your pre approval letter with the offer as well to show that you've gone through the appropriate steps to pre qualify for purchase at this size. Moving down is the final verification of condition. So 5 days prior to close of escrow, as this reads right here, is that we would be able to go in and make sure that the home is in the same condition that it was when you first saw it. So, for example, I had a client that we went and looked at a home and then we were getting ready to close. We went in like 3 days before we were supposed to close just to make sure everything was fine. And at some point, somebody left the sink on and the house flooded. So the house is no longer in the condition it was when she saw it. And we either need that repaired, placed, credit given, something needs to happen to remedy that situation, or the client has the ability to cancel the deal at that point and get their deposit back. So that's why it's important to do a final verification of condition of the property. Assignment request is if you're a business entity, it's just who was the assigned person to sign and make sure we have all that information. The next section is contingencies, and this is a really important section. Contingencies are the thresholds that we have in place to move the deal forward while protecting your deposit. So, as your agent, my responsibility is to protect your deposit as long as possible within the transaction, unless we've had a different conversation about removing those contingencies. You can remove these contingencies to make your offer seem stronger, but we'll make sure to talk about that on a case by case basis, depending on the market that we're in at the time and if it makes sense for you to remove those contingencies. So these are kind of not in order that I would do them, but so we'll jump down here first would be your investigation of the property. So that's doing any inspections, including general home inspection, electrical inspection, HVAC inspection, sewer line scope, roof inspection. We would have a certain window to do that within. If everything looks good, then we could remove that. Once we do those inspections and everything looks good, then we can remove that contingency and basically say, I'm not planning to cancel the deal or request anything based on the inspections that I receive. If we receive those inspections and there's something that's off or something that we weren't aware of, then we can always ask for credit to fix that or a request for repair for it to be done prior to the close of escrow. You can remove this contingency in a couple of different ways. We can just remove the physical inspection portion, which is those that I discuss. And I typically leave in place the inspection part of that contingency that allows you to review all the documents that we get from the seller because we don't always have those up front. In some cases, we do, and we can review all that information up front. Next would be the appraisal contingency. And this is if you're doing a loan, you'll be required to do an appraisal, which is when an appraiser goes out to the property, they measure, and then they do comps to see what is the fair market value of the home. And if that matches with what your purchase price is, then you're good to go on your loan. But an appraisal will be required in most instances. Next is your loan contingency. Just as we move through the process, we do the inspection, we get the appraisal back. They're going to send your loan through underwriting to make sure that everything is, squeaky clean and you're approved for the loan. So this gives us time to work through that process. And once we have it clear to close, that's when I typically recommend we can remove the loan contingency. Last but not least, we have the insurance contingency, which is becoming a big deal in California because we want to make sure that you can get insurance on your property, depending on if you're in a high fire area or not. We want to make sure that that insurance premium is something that you're going to be able to afford along with the mortgage payment. So once we get into contract, that's one of the first steps that I take to make sure we get that quote for you and make sure that it's all going to make sense. So those are the four contingencies that you have in place to protect your deposit. And we'll remove them and have days on here. This doesn't have to be 17, for example. It could be 10 or 14 and 10 and 7. Having these numbers reduced makes your offer stronger because it shows that we're trying to get things done quickly. And then removing these contingencies are also ways to make your offer stronger. And removing those contingencies basically just says that if something comes back, let's say on my inspection, I'm not going to pull out of the deal because of what's on this inspection. So it doesn't mean you can't, let's say you remove your inspection contingency. It doesn't mean you can't do an inspection contingency. It's just saying, I'm not going to cancel the deal because of what I find in that inspection report. Moving on, we have the review of seller documents. So that would be any disclosures or questionnaires that they're required to fill out to provide you information that they know about the house. Next is the preliminary title report, which title runs just to make sure that you're going to get a clean title. There's no liens or back taxes on the property that are going to be owed that you would take on. And then the other items are common interest disclosures or lease or lien items. If those pertain to the transaction, we would receive those and review them in the time frame that is outlined. This box would be checked if you need to sell your property prior to purchasing this property. So if you're in that situation, we probably will already have had that conversation. So we'll just check that box as necessary. Moving on to the next section of possession, when you get the keys to your home, time of possession will happen at recordation. So here in California, the day that we close is when on record the title moves from the seller's name to your name. So at that time, once we have the green light that that's happened, we can go pick up keys and we'll schedule something that day. If the seller, for whatever reason, needs to stay in the property after the close date, we can offer them a certain number of days to stay in the home. I would typically recommend anything less than 29 days, because otherwise you'll need like a lease agreement, and we don't want to get into that headache. So 29 days or less, this is another area where you can improve the strength of your offer by offering them to stay an extra 2 weeks. For example, when I purchased my home, it was in December, closed on December 18th, and I allowed them 2 weeks to stay there, maybe 3 weeks to stay there through the holidays because I know I wouldn't want to move during the holidays. And that was at no extra cost to the seller, but it was something that I felt like would make my offer stronger. And I really wanted the house. And we got it. So there's little things that you can do outside of price that will help make a difference. And I'm going to help guide you through all of those after the conversations that I have with the listing agent. If the unit is occupied by tenants, then we would check this as appropriate. Any documents that are required with the sale of the home, certain ones we have in here that they need to be completed in a certain time frame. So we'll make sure that we meet those requirements. And then moving on to the next page, these are the items that are included and excluded with the sale. So generally a home is going to have a stove, maybe a refrigerator, washer, dryer, dishwasher, microwave. So we would be sure to check all the things we want to make sure are included with the sale of the home. If there's anything that's not listed on here, we can add, kitchen, table. Everything's negotiable in real estate. So we can include what we feel like you like from the home and see if they are willing to sell it with the home and any items that are excluded. So sometimes there may be like a junk car on the property that you want to make sure isn't there, different things like that, above ground pool. So we can also include in here any items we want to make sure that the seller takes off of the property. The allocation of costs. So this is another big area where we can change the outcome of your offer being selected. So this is where we can improve the strength of your offer. So I am going to take a quick pause and check these boxes in the, let's say, typical manner that they're done here in Sacramento County. Okay, so I've gone ahead and checked a couple of boxes. So the natural hazard disclosure is something that's usually covered by the seller. We want to make sure that they provide this. It just says like if you're in a flood zone, if you're in a fire zone, all that kind of information. If you're in a fire area, then we would probably have somebody cover the wildfire disclosure report that you'll need to move forward. If there's any other reports we want them to provide, we can put that here and check the appropriate person who's paying for those reports. The seller is usually responsible for making sure that there are smoke alarms, carbon monoxide detectors, and the water heater is braced because we have earthquakes in California. And then any government required point of sale reports that we need, we would check the appropriate box if we need any of those to be done. And then we kind of get into some of the more traditional ones. Escrow fee is usually split 50-50. As a buyer, you can choose to cover that entire thing if you want, or ask a seller to cover the entire thing. Again, this is where you're kind of playing that game, tit for tat. What am I willing to take on the cost of to help improve the strength of my offer? And so that's kind of the outcome that I want you to be looking at this from. And I'll go over some of these numbers with you so we can make the best decision when we're talking specifically about your offer. Owner's titles insurance. This is just to make sure that you get a clean title at the end of the day. If anything, slips through the cracks in escrow or something, there's an insurance policy in place to make sure that that's taken care of if you've already closed on the home. Next, we have city and county transfer fees. Not every county or city has transfer fees, so those amounts will differ. But again, I'll be sure to share those with you so we can decide if we want to have you cover them, the seller cover them, or do a 50-50 split. Any HOA fees that are necessary. Again, if you're purchasing a home that has an HOA, we'll decide if we want the buyer to cover that, the seller, or to have a 50-50 split. Last but not least is the home warranty. So we can ask the seller to cover this, the buyer to cover this, to split it 50-50, and then we would name who we would like the home warranty purchased with. I've had good experiences with American Home Shield, but I always tell my clients, it's a warranty company. You best be ready to fight for what you feel like you deserve. I've had clients in instances where it's been really hard to get something covered that is in the contract for the warranty. And I've had instances where they, you put in the request and it gets done. I've had a HVAC replaced. I've had a water heater replaced with my home warranty. It's just one of those things. And then we would have the costs not to exceed from the seller. And then you would name the specific plan that you want because they have different levels that you can choose from. Moving on, any additional forms that we would need to add to this document, there's a big list here that we would check to include with the document. So if we're including any of those, I'll be sure to share with you what it is that you're signing. And then this next section, so over here you have 10C, 11L, what paragraph and number all of these things are associated with. So down here we get into all the legal down here we get into all the legal language of what these things mean. I've explained a lot of this to you already. So feel free to just kind of peruse through here and look at anything you might want to dive deeper into. But there are a couple that I wanted to highlight for you. So one of them is 11. These are statutory disclosures that are required. So this one kind of talks about any documents from the seller that you would be required to review and that they would be required to fill out. The Megan's Law database, I would recommend if you have kids or if you want to know if there's any registered sex offenders in your area, this is the website that you can go to look at that. So the next area highlighted was the seller's right to cancel and the buyer's right to cancel. So the seller has their contingencies in place, or if the buyer is not adhering to the contingencies they put in place, that gives them a right to cancel. And then the buyer has their specific rights to cancel. So I would recommend kind of reviewing that as well if you have an opportunity. And then again, this is all language that we've kind of discussed a little bit already. Liquidated damages is if you fail as the buyer to complete the purchase, then that is when the seller has a right to keep your deposit if you've removed all of your contingencies. So this is just saying they would have a rights to those liquidated damages. And then mediation and arbitration, it just says that as a buyer and seller, you would agree to go to mediation prior to arbitration if anything happens, and arbitration over litigation if it gets to that point. So that's what these initials are for. We also have the Fair Appraisal Act notice, just saying that everybody is given the right to a fair appraisal, that it can't be judged by any of the characteristics and classes listed in the Fair Housing and Discrimination Advisory. And then we go down, down, down. This has all your guys' information. Who's signing? Oh, sorry, right here. If there's an entity buyer, if you're a corporation or a company, we would click that box, list who is the authorized signer on behalf of the company, and then go from there. And then this is all of the agent's information. And then once we get into escrow, this would include all of the escrow information. And then last few documents are disclosures and advisories that you would be reviewing. So this is the buyer's investigation advisory, just saying that we always recommend you do inspections and investigation on the property so that you know what you're getting into. If there's any quirks or anything that needs to be repaired, we want to make sure you know that information up front prior to the close of escrow. And then we have the possible representation of more than one buyer or seller. So this document basically outlines that I can be working with multiple buyers and multiple sellers at the same time, that you and another buyer could be interested in the same property and I could write offers for both of you, but I would have to disclose that information that I'm writing the offer, not what's in the offer. So if John Doe and Sally Joe are both writing offers, I have to tell Sally Joe I'm writing an offer for John Doe, and I have to tell John Doe that I'm writing an offer for Sally Joe, but I'm not going to share the contents of those offers and make sure that everything's fair. Same thing with sellers. I can be working with multiple sellers. And then dual agency is representing both a buyer and a seller in the same transaction. So let's say I have the listing, you're interested in purchasing that listing as the buyer. I represent you. I'm going to fill out the offer the way that you want it written, and I'm going to present the facts to the seller and let them decide. I don't make any of the decisions. I'm just here to facilitate the process. Dun, dun, dun. Okay, moving down is the Fair Housing Discrimination Advisory. This basically says that people cannot discriminate based on these specifically listed classes or characteristics on the selection of who they choose to purchase the home or not purchase the home. And buyer's homeowners insurance advisory is the next document. Kind of like I talked about earlier on when we have the insurance contingency. This is just saying the importance of obtaining property insurance, and that will go through the steps to make sure that you're aware of what all the possibilities are for that. But next is wire fraud. So when you do your deposit, like we talked about, you can wire that money in or drop off a check. But if you wire, just know that there is wire fraud out there. This is just an advisory explaining that to you, and I will walk you through the steps to make sure and verify that you're sending the money to the right place. Last is the California Consumer Privacy Act. And this just says that we don't share your information with anybody. It's protected here within the brokerage and that you are covered on that end. So this was what am I signing? This was the California Residential Purchase Agreement, AKA the offer. I hope this helps give you a better understanding of everything. And as always, if you have any questions, feel free to reach out. The one that you get on your home will be a little bit different because it'll have the terms that we've discussed. And if I have missed any forms or haven't done a form that you would like to see that's part of a real estate transaction, drop me a comment, let me know, shoot me a message, and I will get to work on it ASAP.